Okay, so I'm going to start with this larger piece, and I may not make a formal point out of it. I may not go as fancy as this one here, because the most important thing for most people is, how do you get these things thin using these natural materials? So I'm going to see if I can try to answer that. Of course, edge preparation is extremely important, but what's also very important is knowing the limits of your materials. And I say that lightly, but it's extremely important to know the limits of your materials, and to know that thinning is a two-stage process, or there's two aspects to thinning, and a lot of nappers consider thinning, removing flakes, past center line to thin down the center, to get this part thin here. But the other aspect is the width of your piece. Okay? A lot of nappers, when they're first starting, they end up with thick pieces, and they wonder, how can I thin it down in the middle? Well, I think what they're doing is they're losing too much of the edge. So your width to thickness ratio gets screwed up, and it looks like you have a thick point, when actually you're doing pretty good on your thinning. You're just not very wide. Okay? So the trick is to keep it wide at the same time driving flakes across the middle. Okay, two aspects: keeping it wide and then keeping it thin. And of course, that's the width to thickness ratio that everyone talks about. Okay? Now, so the key to this is to try to keep my width. I mean, if this was very wide, I'd say, people would say, wow, that's really thin. If it was this thickness and, twice as wide, you would consider that a thin piece. But it's just the width to thickness ratio. Okay, so with natural materials, you have to maintain your width. And that's one of the hardest things to do with natural materials, because of the way that we need to prepare platforms. A lot of these soft materials don't support small impact areas because they snap off, they break off. But if you use a very dense material, like this is whitetail antler, and I find whitetail to be the densest of the antlers, so I use it a lot. Moose, of course, is also very dense, so when I can afford it, I'll use moose. But whitetail is much more available, and fortunately, it works well on these, relatively smaller pieces, which represent the vast majority of flaked artifacts in the U.S. These smaller, pieces, what modern nappers would consider small. Okay. Anyway, I'll quit blabbing on about that. So my focus here is going to be keeping my width. So try to keep any unnecessary damage or unnecessary work on the edge to a minimum. Do only what is absolutely necessary on the edge work. And it doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. I know a lot of nappers will take exception to that and say the edge needs to be exactly perfect. But I guess that's where one of the areas where I detract from most people is I'll adjust my technique to the edge instead of adjusting the edge to my technique. And I think I mentioned that in the previous video. But I think that's very important. I adjust my technique to match the edge in a lot of cases until the final stages, and then when you have to be extremely precise and extremely careful, you really do have to work on the edge a lot more in preparation for flake removal, because it's so hazardous to remove flakes on a thin piece that everything does have to be almost perfect. But in this stage here, I do a little bit of both. Now you might say, well, why can't you just prepare the edges perfectly throughout the entire process? Wouldn't that be more intelligent? I mean, after all, you know, if you have a lot of success with careful flake removal and careful platform preparation and all that, wouldn't that make more sense? Well, I suppose it does make more sense to be constantly vigilant and careful and preparing the edges perfectly throughout the entire process. If time was not a factor, and if your fatigue was not a factor, and your boredom was not a factor, in the beginning stages you really want to get down to a workable piece without too much fuss. And it's human nature. It's not something that makes sense necessarily. So on paper, yeah, it makes sense to, you know, prepare perfectly every step of the way. But in reality, the process is not quite so cut and dry. So it actually makes more sense to be expedient in real life. Okay, and I notice that with artifacts. I have a lot of preform artifacts, and I notice that, you know, these preforms are not perfect. They're not perfectly lenticular. The ones that are broken also are kind of just haphazardly made in a lot of cases, and maybe that's why they're broken. But I also have a lot of unbroken ones that are also haphazardly made quickly, and you can see the quick flake removals and the early attempts at thinning to get the center thinned down a lot before they actually do careful edge work. And it's all opportunistic flaking. Maybe not all of it, but most of it is opportunistic flaking. There isn't a straight edge all the way around in the beginning phases, and there isn't careful preparation 100% of the time. So there's two reasons there why it's not careful preparation 100% of the time. One, it wasn't, you don't see it in the archaeological record, and two, it's just very difficult to do that with human nature being so impatient and so strapped for time and such. Okay. Now this is a piece of sandstone. Now, when I first started, I didn't like sandstone because the stuff I had kept crumbling a lot and breaking a lot, and I didn't really understand the different grades of sandstone. There's some sandstone that is excellent for abrading and for removing these cleanup flakes, and I didn't realize that in the beginning. So I encourage you to experiment with sandstone. I believe I discouraged people from doing that in the past, but going forward, yeah, if you can find the right grades, and I'm lucky here in the Southwest where I can find, a lot of the good grades of sandstone if I look around in the landscape supply yards and stuff. And you don't really know if it's a good grade or not until you actually start hitting on stone. So they might look at you funny at the landscape supply place, but bring a piece of, bring one of your cores with you and then see how these stones will work on the work pieces that you have. Okay. So as I've been chatting, I've been, dulling these really weak spots and looking for areas where I can hit to thin this down. I don't want to do this too much, and I don't want to do a lot of grinding. Let's see. I'm going to try this here and see how this works. Now, hitting on the ends is kind of dangerous with a billet because it grabs it a lot, and a lot of times I lose my workpiece because I snap it. So let me try this here, and I'm going to hold it like this, kind of wobbly, to lessen the impact. It's kind of a gentle way of doing it by swiping it this way. And I'm starting on the base here to try to get this thin down before I work in the middle, and that's typically what I always do, because you don't want a lot of mass on the ends at all at any time, especially when it starts to get thin. See, that's a pretty flat flake too. And that's another thing that I might get into in other videos, is showing you every flake. You can get a very flat flake with very little bulb of percussion with a hammerstone. And there's a lot of study, there's a lot of flake study that is impacted by these kind of things. You know, a lot of people assume that certain tools produce certain flakes, whereas in my opinion, you really can't tell. There's many different tools that can produce the same kind of flakes, in my view, and techniques, not only just a tool. This one stone, I believe, can produce every single type of flake that you can see in a assembly, and you know, in a debitage assembly, or a pile debitage, from flakes with large bulbs of percussion to small bulbs of percussion to no bulbs of percussion to overshots to every kind of flake with just one tool. It's sitting here doing it freehand. I'm not talking about backing it up against something, or you know, using different sizes of the hammerstones. I'm talking about the same tool can be used, but I won't get into that. Just I'll be mentioning that in future videos, just to keep in mind that I think it's extremely difficult to tell how the actual ancient artifacts were made by flake study. Okay, anyway, I gotta focus on this. I don't know how prominent those scars are in the video. Okay. Now, without accuracy, it's easy to create step fractures. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do is thin this down. And I've talked a lot in this video. Now, the average view duration on my videos is about 6.5 minutes, so I think I've already used up 6.5 minutes of just blabbing. Okay, so it's not getting really thin at the, I mean, I'm getting some what do you call it? Convexity, but it's not really not getting that thin. It's because I'm being very careful. You've got to be aggressive if you want to get thin quick. You have to be very aggressive. Yeah. See, that's too aggressive, and I'm getting some step fractures there. I don't know if you can see. Yeah. I'm going to switch over to a different type of percussion. The hammerstone is great for trimming and trying to prepare the edge, but if you get that kind of stuff, you know, you defeated the purpose of sitting here and getting a perfect edge. Okay. I'm going to try one more time. A lot of times I can get some good flakes to travel, you know, this way instead of that way. Yeah. You guys who are good with hammerstones are cringing right now. I'm a little rusty since it has been, I don't know, almost a month. Okay. I'm just going to clean up those step fractures. Prepare for some strikes that way. Now this brushing dulls it, and it also removes a lot of little flakes and puts a steep, kind of a steep edge on that edge or margin. Okay, so these are the kind of flakes that I'm looking for. As you can see, there's not much bulbar percussion with that one. And I probably could have taken that with an antler too. But if I hold it just right and with a nice grade of sandstone, you can kind of see the dimples in it. Instead of crumbling away, it actually dimples and you know, stays intact instead of crumbling away and breaking apart. It's a good tool. It can produce, you know, flakes that look like they've been removed with bone or antler. And that is getting that did thin it down where I wanted it to. Okay, so if I can get the rest of the flakes to do that, that'd be great. But I'm going to take a break here. Well, let's see. One more flake. I'm going to take a break here and upload these videos so I can have some things uploading while I work on the next set of videos, or while I work on the continuation for this. Okay. Now I'm not isolating. This is kind of a continuous platform here. I'm using a smaller area of this hammerstone than I normally would when hitting with something of this, you know, this size. But it's working pretty good. I can get in there without isolating too much. And again, isolating eliminates a lot of the edge away from where you're isolating. But if you hit that isolated platform incorrectly, all the other rest of the edge is gone. You can't move over and try hitting it again. You just lost your opportunity, and you lose a lot of width. And many beginning nappers have that issue where they isolate, they remove a lot of edge around that one area they want to hit, and then they don't hit it correctly, and then they've already taken away a lot of the edge, and then again take away more of the edge to isolate the next one, etc., etc. So I'm trying to show you how to preserve your width, and I like continuous platforms personally to preserve the width on what I'm working on. Okay. And that's because, you know, if I miss hitting one area I think is good, I can move over and hit other areas. See, I wanted to try to get it just as flat as this, but it wasn't quite as deep, so it didn't quite match up the thickness here, but it's still good. I can probably get it with the next flake. I can probably get a wide flake here, hopefully. It's too shallow. Again, see, I'm moving over. If I had isolated that and hit that incorrectly, I would have to remove a lot more of the edge to isolate the next time. But now I can just move over and see if I can hit again. And I don't think I'm winding up enough for these. And this dimple could be too deep in here already, and it's not catching right. Okay, I mean, these flakes are good, but they're not thick enough. You're not the depth of the flake isn't really what I want, so I got to hit a little bit harder, a little bit higher up. Okay. Much better. Okay. So it's, you know, the flatness, see how that one fanned out? Some went this way and some went that way. And the flatness is, you know, pretty consistent in there. That's what I was looking for. And I do see this kind of flake removal on actual artifacts where the edge is relatively thin, okay? But I hit it with a hammerstone and got some long flakes, long flat flakes. Okay, I'll take a break here and upload these videos.